The sun rose blood red over the empire of Valyria, casting long shadows on the marble spires of the capital. From the high towers of the imperial palace, one could see the entire city waking up, markets opening, temple bells ringing, and soldiers changing the night watch. But in the deepest chamber of the palace, the emperor lay dying. Emperor Cassius Aurelius, ruler of Valyria for over 4 decades, had not left his bed for weeks. The man who had once conquered distant lands, crushed rebellions, and silenced traitors, now struggled to breathe. His face was pale as parchment, and his once sharp eyes were clouded with pain. Beside him, his closest advisor and childhood friend, Marcus Varro, stood silently, watching the emperor fight for every breath. The physicians, dressed in white robes embroidered with golden suns, whispered among themselves. They had tried every herb and potion known to their art, but none had eased the emperor's suffering. "Your Majesty," Marcus said softly, leaning closer, "you must name your successor." The council grows restless. The nobles already whisper in corners, each claiming their right to the throne. Cassius opened his eyes slowly, a flicker of anger passing through them. His voice was weak, but his words still carried weight. "They think I am dead already," he rasped. "No, my lord," Marcus replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "But they are preparing. Without a name, there will be war in the streets the moment you draw your last breath." The emperor turned his head slightly, staring at the golden eagle embossed on the wall. "My sons," he whispered. "Where are my sons?" Marcus hesitated. "Your firstborn, Prince Lucian, is with the army in the east. He marches back with all speed, but he may be too late. Prince Darius is here, in the palace, but..." He paused, unsure how to continue. Cassius closed his eyes. He knew. He had always known. Lucian was a warrior, a man of discipline and honor, loved by the soldiers and feared by enemies. Darius was clever, charming, but dangerous. He cared more for pleasure and power than for duty. "Send for Darius," Cassius said at last, his voice barely a whisper. "As you command, Majesty," Marcus said, bowing deeply before leaving the chamber. As Marcus walked through the dark stone halls of the palace, he felt the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. He had served Cassius since they were boys, watching him rise from a prince to a conqueror, and then to an emperor who ruled an empire stretching from the cold northern mountains to the burning deserts of the south. And now, as the emperor lay dying, Marcus felt a storm gathering, one that could destroy everything they had built. He reached Prince Darius's chambers and knocked. After a moment, the door opened, revealing Darius himself, dressed in a fine silk robe, a goblet of wine in hand. His dark eyes gleamed with amusement. "Ah, Marcus," Darius said with a smirk, "come to bring me news of dear father's health, or lack thereof?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "The emperor wishes to see you now." Darius raised an eyebrow. "So urgent?" Has he finally realized he cannot cheat death forever? "Your father is dying, my prince," Marcus said sharply, "and if you care at all for this empire, you will come at once." For a moment, something flickered in Darius's eyes. Fear, or perhaps ambition, but then it was gone, replaced by that same lazy smile. "Very well," Darius said, setting down his goblet. "Let us see what wisdom the dying emperor will share." When Darius entered the emperor's chamber, he dropped to one knee beside the bed, though the gesture lacked sincerity. "Father," he said softly, "you wish to see me?" Cassius opened his eyes, struggling to focus on his son's face. "Darius," he whispered, "you are here." "Of course," Darius said smoothly. "I would not be anywhere else." Cassius reached out a trembling hand, and Darius took it, holding it gently. "My son," Cassius murmured, "you know, the empire cannot survive if my sons fight over it. You must..." He paused, struggling to breathe. "You must swear to protect Valyria." "I swear it, father," Darius said quickly, but Cassius tightened his grip, his eyes suddenly sharp. "Do not lie to me," he said, a shadow of his old strength in his voice. Darius stiffened but said nothing. "Lucian will return soon," Cassius went on. "You must stand with him for Valyria." At that moment, Marcus re-entered bearing a sealed letter. "Majesty, a rider has come from the east. News from Prince Lucian." Cassius's eyes lit up with hope. "Read it," he whispered. Marcus broke the seal and read aloud. "To my honored father, Emperor Cassius Aurelius, I march with all speed to your side. The campaign in the east is won, but there are whispers of treachery within the capital. I pray I reach you before the serpent strikes. Your son, Lucian." Cassius closed his eyes, his hand falling from Darius's grasp. "The serpent," he murmured. Darius's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Outside the emperor's chamber, as Marcus escorted Darius back to his rooms, the prince turned to him with a sly smile. "So, Lucian returns," Darius said softly. "It seems we will have quite a reunion." Marcus stopped and faced him. "If you harm him, or if you try to seize the throne by force, you will bring ruin on this empire." Darius leaned closer. "And if I don't," he whispered, "if I let Lucian take the crown, do you think I will live to see another day? You know as well as I do, Marcus. Only one of us can sit on that throne, and I intend to be the one." Marcus stared at him, heart heavy with dread. The storm was coming, and Valeria stood on the brink of chaos. That night, as the moon rose over the palace, casting silver light on the gardens and towers, Emperor Cassius Aurelius dreamed of his youth, of battles won and friends lost. But when he awoke, it was not to the sound of war horns or cheers of victory. It was to the cold whisper of death, and somewhere in the shadows of the palace, as the emperor's breathing grew slower and weaker, unseen eyes watched and waited. The death of an emperor was near, and with it, the fate of an empire hung in the balance. The morning after the emperor's last whispered words, Valeria woke to the tolling of the great bronze bell atop the imperial temple. Its slow, mournful sound echoed through every street, square, and alley, announcing what everyone had feared. The emperor was dead. In the palace, black banners were unfurled from the highest towers, and the golden eagle standard of Cassius Aurelius was draped in dark silk. The greatest emperor Valeria had known was gone, and now the empire itself seemed to hold its breath. Marcus Varro stood by the emperor's body as the court physicians prepared it for the funeral rites. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, an emptiness settled in his chest. He had served Cassius for 40 years, and now all that remained was a corpse, pale and cold, laid out on silken sheets. The heavy doors creaked open, and Darius entered, dressed in black, though his eyes gleamed not with grief, but calculation. "So, it is done," Darius said quietly. Marcus turned sharply. "Your father loved this empire more than his own life. Show some respect." Darius smiled faintly. "Oh, I respect him, but now the real game begins, doesn't it?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Lucian will arrive within days. The council must wait for him before declaring the next emperor." Darius walked to the window and looked out over the city, where crowds were gathering in the squares, whispering of what would come. "Perhaps," Darius murmured, "or perhaps they will look to the son who is already here to save them from chaos." Marcus stared hard at him. "Don't make a move you cannot take back, Darius." Darius only smiled, as though he already knew how the pieces would fall. 3 days later, as the funeral pyre for Cassius was built in the Forum of Triumphs, smoke already rose from another part of the city, the barracks of the Crimson Guard, Lucian's loyal soldiers stationed in the capital. Marcus rode swiftly to the scene, his heart pounding. When he arrived, he found the barracks in ruins, burned by fire in the night. The commander of the guard, bloodied and pale, was carried out on a stretcher. "Who did this?" Marcus demanded. The commander coughed, struggling to speak. "Masked men, struck before dawn, set fire to the armory. Many of my men are dead." Marcus's face darkened. It was no accident. Someone was moving swiftly to weaken Lucian's allies before he arrived. Meanwhile, across the city, Darius sat in his private council room, speaking with Lord Septimus, the head of the Senate and one of the most powerful nobles in Valyria. "The people need stability," Septimus said carefully. "With the emperor gone and Lucian far from the city, they will look for leadership." Darius poured himself a goblet of wine. "Exactly, my lord, and who better than I? After all, would you prefer a man of the sword like Lucian, a man who knows only war, or someone who understands the court, the Senate, the people?" Septimus hesitated. "Prince Lucian has many friends, especially among the army. If he returns to find you on the throne, he won't," Darius interrupted smoothly. "Not if we move quickly. Before he sets foot in the city, I will have the crown." Septimus looked uneasy, but the temptation of power was strong. "And if the army opposes us," Darius smiled coldly, "then we give them a choice. Serve me, or share the fate of the Crimson Guard." By the next day, rumors were everywhere. Lucian had been ambushed on the road, his men scattered, and he might never reach Valeria. Marcus, however, had his own network of spies. When he received secret word that Lucian had survived the ambush and was only 2 days' march away, hope stirred in his chest. He went immediately to the palace, where Darius sat in the throne room, holding court as though he already ruled. "My prince," Marcus said, voice calm but firm, "I bring word. Prince Lucian is alive and will be here soon." The court fell silent. All eyes turned to Darius. For a moment, something dark flickered in Darius's gaze, but then he smiled. "Good," he said smoothly. "It will be good to have my brother home, so we may speak of the future." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He did not believe the prince's gentle words. As Marcus turned to leave, Darius called after him, "Oh, Marcus, do make sure my brother is properly welcomed when he arrives." There was something in that smile that made Marcus's blood run cold. Lucian's return. 2 days later, as the sun set over the city, the great gates of Valeria opened, and Lucian Aurelius rode in at the head of a column of weary, dust-covered soldiers. The people crowded the streets, streets, cheering and crying out his name. "Lucian! Lucian! Long live the true heir!" Lucian, tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar down one cheek, raised his hand in greeting. His armor gleamed in the fading light, and behind him marched 1,000 loyal veterans. From a balcony high above, Darius watched, his jaw tight. "He's here," Septimus said quietly at his side. Darius's eyes narrowed. "Then it begins." That night, as Lucian bathed and dressed in the palace rooms prepared for him, Marcus arrived to give him news. "Your brother has moved quickly," Marcus said. "He's already gathered much of the Senate to his side, and he's blaming you for stirring unrest." Lucian frowned. "Father wanted us to rule together." Marcus shook his head. "Darius will never share power, Lucian. You know that." Lucian sighed. "I had hoped we could avoid bloodshed." "You may not have a choice," Marcus said grimly. "Darius has already struck against the Crimson Guard. If you do not act, he will take the throne by force." Lucian looked out over the city. Fires burned in the poorer districts, where Darius's agents stirred riots to create chaos. "The people want peace," Lucian said quietly. "But if my brother forces war upon them, I will not let Valyria fall to ruin." Marcos nodded. "Then you must act soon, before he does." As night deepened, two brothers, one a soldier of honor, the other a prince of shadows, prepared for a clash that would decide the future of an empire. In the palace halls, whispers spread like wildfire. The emperor was dead, but who would wear the crown? And as the moon rose over the marble spires of Valyria, both men knew. The dawn that rose over Valyria was not golden and glorious, but grey and heavy, as though the sky itself knew what was coming. Soldiers moved through the streets, swords at their sides, eyes watchful. Shops remained closed. The people gathered in small groups, whispering of war. By midday, it was clear. The empire was on the edge of battle. The council divides. In the grand marble hall of the Imperial Council, the nobles had gathered in haste. The black banners for the emperor's death still hung from the walls, but now they stood as witnesses to something darker, the final struggle for the throne. Lord Septimus stood at the center, his voice raised for all to hear. "Princes of Valyria," he said, addressing both Darius and Lucian, "this cannot continue. The people fear civil war. You must settle this, here, now. Choose who shall wear the crown." Lucian, standing tall in his plain military tunic, looked across at Darius, who lounged in a gilded chair, dressed in black and gold, the image of a king, though without a crown. "I have no desire for war," Lucian said calmly. "I return only to honor our father's wish and protect the empire." Darius laughed softly, shaking his head. "You always were the dutiful son, brother, but you forget. Valyria does not need a soldier, it needs a ruler. A ruler who burns his own soldiers' barracks?" Lucian asked, his voice cold. The council murmured, shifting uneasily. "You have no proof," Darius said smoothly. "No," Lucian replied, "but I know your hand when I see it." Septimus raised his hand. "Enough. If you cannot agree, the council will vote." But before anyone could speak, a messenger rushed in, breathless. "My lords, the city guard loyal to Prince Darius have surrounded the forum. No one leaves without his order." Gasps echoed in the hall. Lucian's eyes locked onto Darius. "So, this is how you choose to rule, with swords at the throats of your own people." Darius stood slowly, his smile gone. "I do what I must for Valyria, and if that means stopping a war before it starts, so be it."